My name is Ryan Green. I have a small studio in Iowa and Colorado, and we make narrative video games. And the first project that we worked on as a studio was called That Dragon Cancer, and it was an autobiographical video game about the loss of our third son, Joel, to cancer. There is something to developing within constraints, and often, like, even money is a constraint for us. I can think of one example where I spent probably 6 months on the second final scene of the game, making many different revisions of it. What I appreciated was the ability that we had to explore different ways of expressing something that was personal to us. Let me say it this way. We were able to finance the game without going into a profound amount of debt. And because of that, we were able to explore our expression of going through this process with Joel at a pace that didn't feel constrained. I think had we not had any commercial constraints, I think we could have experimented more. I think some of the ways that we kind of maybe failed in our game is where it didn't have the polish that it needed, and that was because we ran out of time or ran out of resources, or just had to be done. So. I think in our culture, at least in our culture here in America, there's a great fear of death and an unwillingness to place ourselves in proximity to pain, and so, or it's kind of a morbid curiosity, but it's always just kind of at arm's length, And I think that we see it in our social media when we just kind of, and I do it too, when you scroll past that person that's suffering. I think that one benefit of That Dragon Cancer is it caused people to stop and look at a topic that most people, especially parents, it's their greatest fear. And so their willingness to stop and grieve with us, I hope it's transformative, because it transformed us. So there's a sense that there's the work that you have, and that's the work that you produce and put out there and people consume it. But then there's the cultural wake around it, right? And I think a lot of times with video games, what's underestimated in the video game culture is the cultural wake around the games that are made. That's broader than the work itself. It's how many people have seen the Mona Lisa in person, but we all know what the Mona Lisa is, and and I think we can look at those cultural artifacts and see how they have a profound effect. So for us, we sold very few copies of our game compared to most commercial. It's a lot for an indie, but it's not a lot, on the scale of broad commercially successful games. However, the amount of people that have seen our game through YouTube videos and things like that are equivalent to games that are much more financially successful. And so in that regard, you're still having a cultural impact of millions of people being able to consume what you've created and talk about that. The younger kids are willing to sit there and listen to something poetic and listen to something painful, and I find that teenagers and kids are very what would you call it, they're very mature in their ability to handle grief and handle pain. I don't think we give them a lot of credit for that, and so I think there's a desire for them to engage with meaningful content, like emotionally meaningful, emotionally significant content, and they're looking for that in the media that they're most comfortable with, the one that they grew up consuming, and the one that shapes like their view of pop culture and everything else. So, but again, it's not just about the kids. I'm just saying it's been interesting to me to see the range of people affected by what we do. You know, the thing that inspired the game was like a night that I spent in the hospital with my son when he was very dehydrated and I felt helpless. And it stuck with me as this idea of like, that feels kind of like a game mechanic where I'm trying to do the right thing and I can't, but the level is broken. And how would that feel to like share it with somebody else that way? So it stuck in my head as a mechanic. I'm a believer in kind of testimony-based art. You know, like if you tell your if you tell your story, or if you tell a story that's very close to you, then you understand the nuance and you're able to share those touchstones with other people. Because people that have gone through similar situations almost always have similar experiences and common touchstones, but people outside of that don't see it. And so when you see emotional, narrative kind of bolted on to something that's more commercially viable without enabling artists to share their own experiences, I don't think we're going to get the kind of meaningful experiences we see in other mediums. Like I see that, how much are novels autobiographical and how much are films autobiographical, and it's common to like see those emotional personal themes expressed there, but for some reason it's uncommon in games. And I think it's in part because even if you're a single artist auteur and you're sharing your own story, it's still profoundly expensive. And so without enabling those finances, I don't think we're going to see kind of the personal story encoded into video games. One way that we've been criticized for That Dragon Cancer is that we expressed a traditionally heteronormative, cisgendered perspective, and religious perspective on loss. And I couldn't tell any other story. Like, that's the story that I could tell because it's my experience, right? But there was a certain desire that, like, I remember reading and interviewing with somebody that was frustrated because, she was a non-religious person who had experienced loss of a child, and I wasn't her world. And so what we did ended up, it didn't comfort her, it actually made her angry, because it opened up wounds from our perspective, that people like us, religious, well-meaning people, may have harmed. And so that there's a hard thing there, because like I think the thing with games that you have to consider more than anything is that the players bringing themselves into the world that you've created. They're bringing their worldview, they're bringing their pain, they're bringing their biases, and that filter is highly present in a video game experience, because so often you say, I did this. So the fact that I am there and that I'm inviting you to sit here, I have to consider you. So it's a hard balance. So like the safe thing for me is to tell it from my perspective as a storyteller. And I think it's safe, but it's also justifiable. If I can tell my story, then I'm not projecting anything on you, I'm just sharing myself. And I think that that's important. I think if there is a dearth of grief-based games from multiple views, then it's a problem, but I can't fill that gap. So just like we had help getting there, we need other organizations that can help other people get there to fill that gap and be able to provide those multiple perspectives. I can't tell you what you believe, I can only tell you what I believe, and I should be careful of that. And put it in a context that makes that clear. Because just as, if I was yelling in your face, you should believe this, I wouldn't do that to you. Like if we're at a table, we're going to speak differently. If we're sitting next to each other on the couch, we're going to speak differently. And I think that that video games offer that intimacy of an invitation to sit with me in my grief, or sit with me in my perspective, come and see something like I've seen it. Or I could also acknowledge you, and I can, as a creator, broadcast an intimacy that acknowledges you, what you care about, what you're frustrated by, what you're fearful of. And I just think that that's a beautiful thing. So the more we do video games, the more I feel like it's it's not a question of empathy as much as it's a question of intimacy. And if we can promote intimacy with players, then I feel like we can have understanding, because intimacy, not just empathy, but intimacy means that I have to acknowledge your pain, right? And you have to acknowledge my pain. And so it's not just about like understanding, but it's also about being kind. So anyway. I'm the wrong one to ask, because I didn't go through academia. I'm trying to think of one of the academic papers I read was how to average quaternions, so that we could control our camera better. So that was awesome, and we applied that directly. I mean, I think the easy answer is code, but on the emotional front, I think where I'm interested is in exploration of narrative, but not from AI researchers. Like I would prefer to get a bunch of writers together and explore storytelling from a bespoke perspective. I think there's like this desire to run towards AI, but like I feel like we're underutilizing other disciplines outside of video games. And so one of the things that I hope to do in our work is look for opportunities to like how do we embrace the humanities, how do we embrace the arts, how do we teach them how to express themselves in digital and interactive, because they're going to come up with new ways to do it. And I think that we've kind of like, we've tested, we have tried and true things, but it's mostly from an engineering perspective, and not as much on like a literacy or a literary value perspective. So I think I would love to bring the humanities into what we're doing more. So I would read papers where novelists are, where they're experimenting with storytelling. So.